Hi, I'm Kira. I'm a multidimensional director, and over the past decade, I've worked at the forefront of immersive entertainment and XR, blending storytelling and emerging technology to create experiences that challenge the boundaries of what's possible. I've worked with many leading technology brands and directed on the world's largest volumetric stage. Now it's time to open a space for brilliant minds to share their visions for the future of experiences. Through my eyes, you'll discover unique perspectives that redefine what it means to see beyond reality. Welcome to Portal to the Next Stage. Lisa Sanaye Dring is an Emmy-nominated writer and director, and she is the Tao Foundation resident playwright with the Ma Yi Theater Company. And at the time of filming this episode, her production Sumo is making its premiere Off-Broadway at the Public Theater in New York City. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks, Kira.
I'm so glad to have you here.
Me too.
I'm excited that you're here in New York City.
Yes.
Because sometimes we are separated across time and space and we're on different coasts, and I feel like coordinating moments in time is always a thing.
Yeah, we worked together for a few years before in-person happened.
Yeah.
So here we are, humans.
In physical reality. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad to be in time and space with you. Mm-hmm. I wanted to start a little bit about, I've been looking at and really kind of dialed into associations, how we associate ourselves. And you have a very creative background. You've had a number of creative paths in your life. You have been an actor, a writer, a director, and a puppeteer.
Yeah.
And just to name some of your acting credits, because there are all some incredible productions that you've worked on. You were in productions of Barry on television, Shameless, How to Get Away with Murder. And then from some of your puppeteering background, which is how I first connected with you, you have trained and performed in bunraku puppetry. That's not a typical credit, I would say. I won't say not a normal credit, but not a typical credit on a resume. And I think it's a really incredible background. Are you resonating with one of those forms of identity right now? How do you like to express yourself?
Well, thank you so much for saying all those nice things and for knowing this about me. It's a good question. Right now, I've been mainly writing, but preparing to direct this year simply because that's what's been happening. That's what, especially with getting ready for Sumo at the Public, it's like the past year has been like, okay, putting my life in accord with that. I made a living acting for about 7 years while I was writing and directing. And I was
just
acting.
Say that one more time. You made a living acting. That's also another incredible feat. Not a lot of people get to do that and say that they've done that.
Yeah, it was cool. It was really cool. It was mainly commercials and then some TV. But I found out when I started writing that this is my deepest well. And this is where the most energy is. And now, although I really love performing, it costs something from me that I can't write while I'm acting in a show, and auditioning is a full-time job. And so I've prioritized writing for now. I also feel, in the pandemic is where I made the switch professionally, meaning now I write and direct for a living. And I'm more introverted now. And acting is especially acting in a play, is such a long-term activity with community. And I really love it and it fulfills me, but at the end of a run, it costs something different than what I have. It costs me a little more than what I have. And so I feel a little bit, the boundaries around what we call ourselves as artists feel a little bit reified by capitalism in a way that I don't know is necessarily helpful for me. Like the name I call myself is not defined by these things. We live life and we want to use it, our love for life, to express ourselves in a certain way. And also, I'm a writer.
I love that. We'll settle on that for this moment. This is where your life has led you to right now. When did you first notice in your life, can you remember the earliest time in your life when you felt like, I'm a writer?
It's weird because only in the past year or so have I been like, oh, this was like a dream I had. I would say that, if you met me, you met me as an actor, and I'm kind of When I work with actors who I think are like very dramaturgical, I'm like, oh, there's like a writer in you. Whether or not you're writing, there's like a little way in that feels very specific. And I always felt like as an actor, even like my energy is a little different than a lot of actors I know. But I would say, you know, I didn't, there were things about the way I was raised that led me to inhabit a silence. And so I had to push past those things in order to find my voice as a writer. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people have to do that. But in some ways, I feel like I've always been a writer and just didn't have contact with my own language for a long time. But I remember as a kid, like writing poems and stuff, but I would also draw. Like, it was just like, you know, you're a kid. You're like, oh, I'm expressing myself. So I find when I found language, it was not just a tool, meaning like when I found language in the dramatic arts, it was not just a tool with which to express myself. It's also a way to make meaning and a way to understand and shape the world. And that is immensely beautiful, I think. And so I'm sort of hooked on that feeling of like us creating the world together. And my deepest tool is language. Mm-hmm. I think maybe because I didn't have access to it.
So it's almost like a discovery of self, where as your creative path was unfolding, then you found that, and I love how you called it your deepest well. That's such a beautiful metaphor. You found into this depth of your own creativity.
Yes.
And then do you feel like skills emerged, or did you have to seek out courses and training in order to find how to write, how to do a 3-act structure,
yes.
etc.?
Well, I'm still doing that. I come from, like, I'm a creative, like, they say gardener versus architect. Do you know this? Like, so a gardener writer, you just kind of vibe and you see what's up. And an architect plans. And so as I move more into screenwriting too, architecture is very important.
I'm an architect.
Yes.
I think
it's amazing.
Yes.
I'm very much a gardener. Like, I go and I'm like, just kind of write, and I'm like, what is the unconscious saying? And then I develop it consciously. So in terms of structure, I'm always learning structure as a second language, because my first is like the sort of, where does the language want to go? Mm-hmm. I did take classes. I went to a year of CalArts for creative writing. They didn't have their playwriting program, and I didn't feel like I think their film production was like film production. It wasn't screenwriting. So I went and studied mainly poetry that year. And then I dropped out because I ran out of money. It was like this, I was going out for TV a lot more, so I was busier. And then also I think because I was in school, I wasn't showing up to my auditions as prepared or as sparkly as I would, so I also wasn't booking as many commercials. So it was this weird thing where my career was kind of moving in the TV realm, but my commercials weren't doing so hot. And so, yeah, I was like, I don't want to go into debt for this, and so I left. But what also really helps is being, you know, a maker. You're learning about the craft from another side, meaning like I'm learning a ton from you as director, being with you as a writer and an actor. Mm-hmm. And so it's a beautiful thing, actually, because every time I'm doing one thing, I'm studying another thing. Like when I'm an actor in a play, I'm memorizing and embodying language. And so I'm like, what other way? I can't think of a better way to apprentice with a playwright than to study their language in a way that's embodied and memorized and performed over and over. So in many ways I came at it and I had to study. And then also I've been producing theater and working, like I've stage managed, I've, you know, done all these things. So I've watched new work get developed over time in these various ways. So I was at once new and also versed in many ways.
I love how you're speaking to the fact, though, that your education can be of an experiential nature. You can learn from being a part of productions. You can learn from engaging in different forums and working with other people. It doesn't have to be an undergraduate degree followed by a master's degree. You don't have to train and train and train for years.
Yes.
You can learn almost within the format itself.
Totally. And I think my barometer, because I teach now, and so, you know, when people are, and even I love learning. Actually, I really want to go do a low residency MFA in poetry. I really love, like I was just listening to one of my poetry teachers, Robin Cost Lewis's books on tape when I came here. And I was like, being sort of in a dense atmosphere of thinking and learning is so beautiful. And also, it's very expensive, and it takes a lot of time and energy. So I think, though, with regard to, like, do you need more school? It's like, do you have the tools you need to keep learning in practicum? Do you have a skill set that lets you work? And also, do you know what you don't know enough that you can seek it out on your own? And if the answer is yes, then it's like, why not get those skills writing?
By doing.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, I love school, so there's always that pull.
Well, you can always go back.
I know.
The point is, you can learn by doing. You don't necessarily have to pursue tons of degrees. And I love that you're saying you love learning. And I feel like that is what makes our lives so rich as humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's talk about virtual reality.
Let's
do you remember
do it.
learning that?
Let's
because
do it.
This is what I brought you into. I want to come to Sumo a little bit later in our conversation and sort of land in the present. But if I take us back to how we first met, I was introduced to you because I was looking for performers that knew how to use puppeteering, that had a background in that. And I thought that might be an interesting skill to have to step into performing in virtual reality. Do you remember performing in VR, and did you feel connected and embodied, or did you feel disconnected from your virtual body? If you can take me back to that.
That's a good question. And the answer is both. It's interesting because I came at it via puppetry. I like how in theater we can break open reality. And so puppetry is such a beautiful way to do that. I also like that there's this thing between us, like if we're trying to communicate, this cipher between us, which is a puppet. Hi. But like we can all put our energy in this thing, and in some ways it's a deeper understanding of one another than if we just looked at one another and tried to speak. It's like using this object where we can project all this information that we have, and then it speaks to a deeper truth than if we just did it front facing toward one another. So I bring this up because puppetry is so lo-fi compared to VR. And so it was interesting that you were like, I think you could do VR. And I was like, oh, because I've been developing this skill, which I agree, VR or puppetry is a great tool. It's a great way to train for VR. It feels sometimes antithetical. Where it's this hyper mitigated space via technology is VR. And puppetry is like often you like, it's someone's garage where you're like, hey, look at this sock puppet or, whatever. It's like, it's often done by people who are very tactile and aren't interested in screens as much. So anyway.
Whereas here we then strapped a screen to your face.
Right,
and you
and then little
And I
things.
remember your first rehearsal so vividly with Jen Harris. And the two
We were
of you
cats?
were oversized cats.
Oh my God. I was thinking about that on the way here. I was like, this is the best. Truly.
This is how we started.
When you're a giant cat talking to another giant cat and you're like, we're vibing. It was so funny.
It was very fun.
She's also the best.
She's also very funny.
Truly.
Yeah, so the two of
truly.
you were improvising and getting to know your virtual bodies. And Jen had worked with us in VR in the past. So she was like, welcome to VR, Lisa.
And I was like, yeah. It was also interesting because it was 2020. And so embodiment, disembodiment was a whole thing, being inside. I was in LA, so we had access to more outdoors than I think most people in New York. But that kind of relationship of like, am I embodied, am I disembodied, was a conversation I was having with myself, being like, how do I work out? How do I get inside myself?
And do you remember flying?
Yeah, flying's cool, and also it's amazing. And then I had to close my eyes on the way down because it was uncanny the way I would actually think I was falling. But so sometimes, to answer the long way around, sometimes it was super embodied, and amazing that you could like interact with people who are also being embodied. The audience being embodied, I think, is one of the more beautiful parts, and getting to interact with them and knowing that they're all over and
all over the world. I mean, that production of Finding Pandora X was truly international. We had people coming in from Japan and Italy and France and California.
Yeah. But then sometimes they'd be like, I'm sitting down. And you're like, oh, or a glitch would happen and your arm would be like over there. And you're like, oh my God. And it's weird because you kind of forget. You do think it's just your body. And then something will snag or you won't move the way you intended to. And then it's like, it's a head trip. But in some ways, I think I told you this, like I remember driving in the first like month we were working together and being like, this reality feels as real as virtual reality. And it kind of like the Matrix. I was sort of like, whoa, my senses are telling me this world is real, but they're doing the same thing in virtual reality as well.
That's right.
Whoa.
What reality are we in? Exactly. Yes. And it is all layers of perception and how we experience that and how attuned I think we are to our senses. And when you have your body more physically engaged, which we were trying hard to do in that production where we're moving the audience through and we're having all of our gods and goddesses, you played the character of Hermes and you had this ability to get to fly and be supernatural, but you also had to physically engage your body to do that motion.
Yes.
So that makes it more real.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just finished this book, The Goldfinch, which is like, now 10 years old. And at the end of it, the author talks about like this reality that's happening in our perception. And at that she calls it like a rainbow field, like the moment of our perception touching the corporeal world is where all beauty and all art is. And I think VR makes me experience that even more because it's this sort of sensorially, seemingly real place that is also completely manipulated, completely created by imagination, and yet our bodies are touching it in a deeper way than if we were just watching Netflix on our, computer or whatever.
Amazing. That's beautiful.
It's a good book. That came at like page 797 or something. It's at the very end, but it's worth it.
But it's worth it just to get there.
Really good.
Let's now step into the next production that we did together where I brought you into the writer's room for a comedy piece called Skits and Giggles, which originated as a kind of research and development piece with Meta. They were curious about comedy. I was curious about comedy. Could comedy work in virtual reality? How did you feel? Does comedy work in VR?
Yeah. I think in some ways it stretched my imagination because the bodies, as a person, I've studied clown, as you know. And so the corporeal vulnerability and the accidents we make with our eyes, with our face, that's my favorite kind of humor. And so having that level of your humanity not be present is tricky. But there's lots of linguistic ways of humor. I mean, what's beautiful is that there can be lots of gags, physical gags that don't have to do with the body. They're sort of surreal.
Right. When we brought the monster in.
Yeah, like these things that we can't do. So I think it's learning a different language. It's just like any medium. It's like what are the specific things this can do versus live performance embodied in like a non-virtual space. So I think in some ways there were challenges, and also the core of it is just like joy and fun and play. And that's totally possible.
What was different for you about being in that writer's room writing for virtual reality?
Well, they're so funny. All the people were so funny. And so I think just asking questions of the medium as we went along. So first of all, I was just like, oh my God, these people are amazing that we were in the writer's room with. And I also really loved the way it was run. And then also, I find this way with a lot of work I do. It's like the train is being built as you're taking off. And so we're finding out the edges of the universe as you're creating language for it. And the design impacts the language in many ways. And
we were building the virtual worlds as we were
Yes.
writing the show. It was very much simultaneous to each other.
But what was beautiful is just as the design impacted us, like we would write something and then you'd be like, and then we can do these 8 things off that joke. And then you could go further. So I think that was just seeing how porous the medium and the message was cool.
Yeah, it was a fun moment. And was performing in that production, later on we got to do a show with Rain Dance, the Rain Dance Film Festival. Was performing in that show similar or different to Finding Pandora X for you?
Well, my character in Finding Pandora X was mainly at the beginning and was mainly just hanging out with people, making them feel comfortable in this world. And so it was really fun because like I would, in Skits and Giggles, we would like create a scene and then I'd go off to the next scene and just wait. I remember that eerie feeling where like, it's like being backstage where you're like, do I go on? Except I was waiting for people to arrive in my world. And that, it's just like that same kind of theater feeling that was in VR that I'd never felt in a technologically mediated space. So in some ways same, in some ways totally different.
Did that space of waiting for the audience to arrive feel more like immersive theater?
Yeah.
Where you're just waiting, like,
Totally.
when are they entering this moment
Yes.
and this space with me?
Yes, like that. And also, your brain also has to do some things where it's like, making sure everyone got there, and sometimes there'd be a lag. So there were a few more scripts running in your head than just theater. But yeah, it's like that.
Another digital piece that you worked on, and I will kind of label it digital as opposed to virtual, because I like to make a differentiation between when we're working more screen-based versus stepping into something more three-dimensional. But it had a three-dimensional aspect too, was Welcome to the Blumhouse Live. Can you talk about that piece and what that signified during the pandemic and how the audience responded? Do you think the audience was evolving during the pandemic to step into this digital landscape and environment?
That's a great question. So this was a piece that I did with Little Cinema, Blumhouse, and Amazon Prime. And Little Cinema used to be like this company that threw like the party before a premiere. So you'd go, if it was a murder mystery, they'd have a whole murder mystery event going on with live actors and everything. And then when everything went digital, they pivoted in a really beautiful way. So Matt Hill, my friend from doing immersive theater, brought me on. And basically, Amazon Prime and Blumhouse partnered together for 4 films, 2 years in a row, so 8 films total. And every October, they did an hour-long live digital event that took the themes of the 4 shows that were about to premiere, and we wove it together in a story. And people could play. So in the first one, there was a missing girl, and people were going about the digital space trying to find her. And they would be able to talk to actors. You could type on your computer, like, tell us about blah, 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 and ask for certain things. And the actors would read what you typed and answer it live. So it was a little bit like a game experience, and also a little bit like immersive theater without that element. And there were some rooms that were on rails or like pre-recorded, and there were, I think, 4 live rooms. And then we had rooms that were like a tarot reader and everything, because it was also the premiere party. So you'd have like celebrities who would get videotaped in, and they'd be part of the experience. And then we did a few like closed sessions for the premieres, and then we did it for the public a few times too. And it was really cool. I do think audiences were evolving to understand what this is. And also we had some people, like the people who were doing escape rooms and stuff, who were really invested and already knew the language. So it's always interesting when you do immersive theater to find the sort of proscenium-based audience versus the immersive audience versus the game audience, and they respond really differently. So I think everybody, was learning as they went, and you could tell which audiences were better versed in certain types of the narrative form.
Do you think because of the pandemic, audiences were shifting? Like, let's say a proscenium theater audience that might not first find an experience like this and be compelled to try it, were they stepping into it because this was a new option and they wanted to stay connected to theater?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you saw it with the Geffen had they chip you a little box, and then you watched a live programming too. Like, many theaters were experimenting with this. I think most of our crowd were film crowds because they got to it through Amazon Prime and Blumhouse. And also, I do think our appetite for that has changed. That experience of liveness it's so unique. And also being at home was the way, and also being at home is awesome. Like, I love theater. Obviously I make
right.
it.
If theater can come to your living room, I love theater and going to the theater, and I want to continue to do that. But I think it's also an advantage to see if we can meet people in a new way and bring theater to them.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like this third thing that's evolving, and even now I'm seeing,
the third
new
space.
Things. It's the third space, and we love the third spaces.
True. And then, this production, it was a really interesting production. This is the production that was nominated for an Emmy. Mm-hmm. Did you find working with the content, was it challenging? What was it like in that moment of time?
It was so much fun. Also, because it was September 2020 and I hadn't been making. Like, I'd been making on my own, but I think we had 30 days from concept to the show. And so it was really wild. I also love, Matt Hill brought me on, and he's such a good leader. He was sort of like what is it called? He's the creative director for the piece. So although we co-directed and co-wrote it, like it was his idea at inception. And just seeing how everyone was moving as the form was moving and being able to film with each other. Like there was a lot of PPE going on because it was September 2020, October 2020. But it was incredible to have to write something because you also had to write four to six scripts, hour-long scripts. So there's a beauty to when things have to go fast, you know? And you also have to accommodate for liveness. So it wouldn't be like a normal script. It would be like, okay, people might ask you this, 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 and then they would be able to improvise, but I would give them potential ways to answer. And then we get test audiences, and then we'd be like, oh, they're asking this. Okay, here's some new information. And you work with the actor. And so in that way, I think everyone was just so excited to be making, and it was so collaborative that it was a joy, you know?
So let's talk about Sumo.
Let's do it.
And the inception of that and where your process started there. And you've had more time because obviously it commenced at La Jolla Playhouse and now it's here in New York. You've had more than 30 days and that is a long form evolution and process. And so what's that been like? How is it different?
I mean, I remember I thought about this in early 2019 and I had just written a solo show and co-written something, but I wrote my first dialogue-based full-length play. And so I was like, oh, I think I'm a writer. And I remember I applied to MacDowell with this idea for sumo wrestling. And it was at that point in my life where I was like, I don't know if I'll get in. If I get in, I'll write this piece. And then I got in. So I was like, I guess I'm writing this play. And I'd seen sumo, you know, years prior in Japan. And so it just sort of struck me. So this is a play set in Japan, one young man's journey to joining a heya, which is a stable where sumo wrestlers live and train.
And they live together there.
They have to live together until you're a certain rank. And it's almost monastic. You know, they eat at the same time, they train at the same time, they're only allowed to wear certain things, they can't drive. And it's about his rise to power within the heya and also his presence overturning the established power structures. And it's also about him as he rises, he becomes something different than what he thought he would be. And so once you get to where you're going, are you still the person that started out? And does that new person you've become still want that thing that you were going after before?
It's a beautiful journey. I mean, it feels a lot like life in general. Many people pursuing something, especially athletes.
I'd written it, you know, with East West Players in their writers group, but it wasn't until I got to MacDowell 5 years ago, that it really, like, my whole creative life changed. It was where I really took myself seriously as a writer too. And I had a daily practice for the first time and I discovered things about myself. And so it's strange to live with something this long because people are like, what's it about? And I'm like, it's about everything. It's about my entire heart. It's about everything I think about the world. That's not... I mean, I can talk about what it's about. It's about sumo wrestling. It's about masculinity and hierarchy and power and athletic prowess.
There's so much about the hierarchy. I didn't realize this kind of levels and like rankings and the sweeping of the floor and, you know, being at the bottom rank, but being a part of it, being connected to it. And it's also spiritual. And I remember just from my own semiotics, when I think about sumo wrestling, I know it's connected to something spiritual. I don't exactly know how. It's somehow connected to the Shinto religion. But then on top of it, what I love about your production is it's very funny.
Oh, thank you.
It's very funny. Right off the top of the first scene, it's very funny. And then, of course, there's humor in all of the interpersonal relationships of the wrestlers. There's a lot about, you know, the human body in the production. And that character that you're talking about is Akio, and he's a really interesting character. Where did the thought about this character and his relationship to these other, you know, sort of entrenched wrestlers start from?
Well, I'm very spiritual, to talk about the spiritual elements. So I'm interested in spirituality, and then also there is a sort of cipher for this piece that is also about, like, Carl Jung and the idea of anima animus. And so these men... we have people in our cast who are non-binary as well, but and their characters, they play men. they become themselves by embracing the feminine surrender. The spirit, and gender is a tricky thing to talk about. So
because it's a masculine sport, and when we look at it sort of through visual photographs, or if it's covered in movies, we're getting kind of on a pop culture surface where we see men, but there's actually a feminine piece to it, which I think is really interesting. And I have a few quotes I even want to read.
Oh my God, what an honor! Well, I mean, so it's a Shinto sport, and in Shinto tradition, women are often excluded from sacred things. And so when you go to Japan in the dohyo, in the circle, they spend a whole day creating this clay circle and they pray over it. And women aren't even allowed on that clay space, not even to like clean it, not anything. And so it's this, and it's wild as Shinto, like Amaterasu is the main goddess of Shinto, and she's a woman. So these paradoxes exist, as they exist in Western society, in America as well. So this idea, like they have to, and I was also interested in this idea of surrender in an athletic context, because so often we see sports as like, I'm conquering. It's very Aristotelian. It's very like patriarchal. Like I'm overcoming this. And in some ways, I think what's beautiful about my perception of Eastern religions and ways of thinking is you have to submit to things. Like, living, like in Japan, if you want to be a floral arranger, you have to go study it for years and years and years. You totally submit to this practice. And so this individual versus collective energy to like become champion, you have to be one of this sport, one of the tradition, one of the many. Those are sort of sometimes at odds and sometimes beautifully speaking together in harmony too.
To give it a little bit of a preface, I have been really interested in the ritual of theater. When we go to theater, it feels like a ritual. I think rituals are missing in society. I have a colleague, Caitlin Krause, that speaks to this as well. I think they're really interesting. They don't necessarily have to be tied to religion to have ritual, but I love that when we go to the act of theater, we create a sacred space where the performers can reveal their truest nature and also the truth about the production of whatever the truth is in the production. And there were just two things that I wrote down that really struck me, that stayed with me. One is this, which is said early on in the play, they are two men, and by beating his opponent, one may become a god. And so that idea of like man becoming God, getting closer to God, I think is really interesting. And this other one, which ties to the feminine, which is the character Shinta says, the spirit of Sumo is a woman. And I just impacted me. There's just something about that was so beautiful, because when you look at the sport, you don't necessarily think of that. So if you could
that second part is my personal entrance into the piece. I was interested in this piece also because it has no space for me, like my body as a female-ish person, And so you
don't still have it on your agenda list to become a sumo wrestler later.
I'm not trying, no. But I just mean like that which is sacred in this particular practice, that female bodies or feminine bodies are not welcome. And so for me, this is my interest. The spirit of sumo, being a woman, is like my agenda. And then that idea of like, by beating your opponent, you may become a god. It's just this idea of becoming more than yourself, to make something more than yourself, to embody something. I mean, yokozunas, which are the highest ranked in sumo, they're like celebrities. They are, they're mythic in some ways. And so what is it to sort of rise higher than just us in our form is interesting to me.
I think many athletes are trying to do that when they're competing for a gold medal even. How do you become the best? Right? And look at Simone Biles. How do you become the GOAT? I mean, it is almost attaining the unattainable, getting closer to the ultimate version, which almost feels like it could be very spiritual.
Yes, totally. And something I'm also interested in, which is embedded in this text, is that through your body, you can become divine. I feel like in a lot of traditions, there's this idea of transcendence or leaving your body in order to touch divinity or be with divinity. And in other traditions, this idea of immanence, this idea of embodied spirit is at the core of this play.
How do you write for the physicality? How do you put that on the page for the actors and for the fight choreographer? Because there's obviously a lot of intense physicality in this production.
Well, that's one of the most beautiful things about this show in particular is that I could not have done it without seeing it embodied, without working with it. We have two fight choreographers, actually. Chelsea Pace, who's this amazing intimacy and fight choreographer, and then James Yaegashi, who's a martial artist, and he's our co-fight director and our cultural consultant. So he has a big martial arts background and he knows a lot about sumo. And then Chelsea's coming in here with her expertise in having, intimacy and fight choreography for the stage. Although James, I think, is well versed in that too. And so, so much of the script was found in the rehearsal process in the first and also this time. Some of the sequences I have thought of, but they're just the start. And I think that's any playwright, I think, feels like their work isn't the work, it's the map for the other artist to come in and lift it. And then only then is it what it wants to be. And so through their geniuses and their ideas and the actor's embodiment and how it's working for them, that's shaped the text a lot. But in sort of dreaming about it, I watched so much sumo wrestling online. And also I've watched American sumo, in LA, they have the World Sumo tournaments and stuff. So just getting acquainted with that world was just watching a lot of stuff.
Where did you see the commercial aspect of it? Because I wasn't aware of that part where sponsors get involved.
Totally.
Toyota, Fuji, the businessmen in suits. There's a scene about the karaoke scene. I hope that doesn't give too much away. There's a scene about karaoke. Couldn't imagine that intersection. So that was really interesting to see. Can you talk about that tension between the kind of monastic life that they have and then this...
Yeah, and once you become a big deal, you're like a celebrity. So you go from being kind of monastic, you're not allowed to date until you're a certain level, and then you can live outside the head, then you get sponsorships, then you're going to big parties. It's wild.
How do they make that shift? That must take
you just have to win.
Much.
Yeah, it's
But then who prepares them for that? That's
I don't know.
A huge shift.
Yeah, I can imagine. This play, as all my plays are secretly about capitalism. And so the verticality of power versus a horizontal form of connection and power is in some ways just distilled down to my ideas around kyriarchy and capitalism and structures of society based on subjugation and oppression. And so it's a metaphor. So with the suits, yes, they're a big part of it. And there's a lot of parts about sumo that aren't in the play. We had to cut some out. But it is, and I also wanted to say that which is profane is sacred too. This is a space of sacred things and profane things. And muddying that territory is of deep interest to me.
Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a binary.
I just didn't expect that. That was so interesting to see that part of it. But again, I'm not close to that world. So thank you for building this world for us to enter because it's really fascinating. You have a background as well, having trained for television and film writing. You were part of a really wonderful fellowship, the Warner Media HBO TV fellowship, very competitive fellowship to get to be a part of. Can you speak a little bit to that program and diversity in the field?
Oh gosh, yeah, especially now. Yeah, it's awesome. I did 3 TV writing fellowships in that year, and the Warner Media Fellowship was amazing. I really love them and the people who run it. I also directed and curated their showcase for their actors that year, and so it was really great to work with that team in a different capacity. It's great, and also I met some of my dear friends in that place. I think that those things are important, and I'm really sad that they're being attacked and dismantled systemically right now.
Do you feel, having sat in many of these creative rooms now, television writers' rooms, virtual reality writers' rooms, theatrical rooms, are you finding that diversity is a part of these processes? Is it still in the, I almost have this sort of metaphor, in the corners of the room? Where do you see it coming into play?
Well, the fact that there is space for me means something. And also there's a long way to go. I find that I'm often in spaces of deep beauty and respect and care, and so I'm really grateful for that. And also, yeah, I could tell you, we both have stories, right? About how this world could be a lot, this industry could be a lot better.
And I think sometimes it's good to look at it with humor in a way, to sort of go like, well, that's interesting,
That's all happening.
Right? But how can we change it?
Yeah.
I think my interest, and part of the reason I'm making this podcast, is to keep featuring more voices and saying we're still here.
Yeah.
We're going to keep creating. We're not going away. Even if the system shifts, we'll still be here.
Yeah.
And the art will get made and the voices will be heard.
Yeah. Hell yeah, Kira. Yeah.
That's the best kind of revolution that I can make on a very micro level.
It's beautiful.
And for aspiring writers and creators that might be listening, do you have any tips that you might want to share with them?
Yes.
Some closing tips?
I mean, I've got like the Joseph Campbell follow your bliss, but I think it's real. I think that we who go into these fields have a calling, and you have to be able to follow the call even if it changes, and really listen to what's going on in your soul. I do think that to make art is to reflect one's love, curiosity, interest, engagement with the world, and so you have to love the world, or try. And I think in, the commodification of self and our work, it can be easy to forget that and to be thinking about making a product. And I think in so many ways, like, it's not just what we make, it's how we perceive the world, it's how we live that gives us the foundation for our art.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
Okay, there's one topic that we have to talk about. Artificial intelligence, AI. How do you feel about it? Does it make you excited? Does it make you nervous? Neither of those things. How do you feel about it?
Well, it's interesting because you're a producer, so you're the one making the decisions about whether or not you're going to use it. How do you feel?
I like it and I don't like it. Again, I think it's a tool. And I think we have to look at a tool. I like to give this metaphor of a knife. You can butter toast with a knife, or you can kill someone with a knife. It's a choice of how we use it. So I think it's going to be a part of our reality. It's not going away. We can't run away from it. I think we need to learn how to use it. We have to learn how to use it ethically. We have to be aware of when it's being used in a process and make that more publicly understandable. Because I think the infiltration of imagery that's created with it, that is being generated by a human that is prompting it. So there is a human input, but then the output obviously is artificial. And I think understanding what has been properly human made with a lot of human effort, at the same time, it can make some processes more efficient. But we use it. It hasn't replaced a single role on any of our productions. If we're using it in an art stage, it's to do some concepting, but the concepts are still coming from here. And in here, they didn't come from AI, and they were with me for years. And the way of which I will create that production, AI will be of little help to get that done. But is there a part in the conceptual phase and the development phase that it can help us? Possibly. But I don't want to use it to write the dialogue. That's what you're for, the human. And I think that the human creative and I think process is also very important for a creative process.
Yes, it's an interesting, the way you're talking about it is interesting. It's like, are we going to art and entertainment for craft, like to see someone's craft, or are we going for their subjectivity? And at times AI can be used to let someone's subjectivity be communicated in a more easy way. I've never thought about it like that. I'm here to see how other humans feel about humanity and express themselves. And so I'm not going to art like a thing that is just for me. I'm going to art to be like, what do we think is funny? What do we think being a human or being on this planet is for? And so for me, I'm thinking specifically about writing, like, I'm not that interested in what an AI has to do. I have thought, this is like I know this much about Marx, but I'm going to talk about him. Like, he talks about capitalism creating the means for production. And then we can seize those means for production and then chill, basically. And so it's like, if we were to create the commerce shows, the shows that like we just need product or create it, and we're just like, oh yeah, AI makes that now. No one wants to write that, and whatever. And then we go off and make art. Everybody else, all the writers are free to be like, what's in here? What do I want to do? That could be beautiful if everyone wasn't so worried about surviving. Like, there is a world where AI is coming out and we're all like, do we work 25 hours a week now collectively? Is that possible now? And so that's not happening. I realize that's not what we're in right now, but I do think like, all we have to do is seize the means of production. But anyway, for me, yeah, it's just like I don't go to creative work. There's a interest in connecting with who's on the other side, even if it's impersonal. That to me, it's a bummer with AI. And also it's here. I've not worked, I've known people to like sort of like, sometimes I'll get a round of edits or a pitch that I can tell is AI generated. Like, I think,
It's not a part of your creative process right now.
No. Because I also love writing. Like the craft of, I love doing it. I love thinking with the page. It's not like I think of a thing and I'm like, oh, that's the idea. The physical act of writing and being with the page and getting ideas from it and iterating is so deeply hard and pleasurable for me and fulfilling, even if it's not pleasurable, that I'm not that interested.
You don't need the shortcut.
I mean, I need it. I don't want it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. I find as an artist, creator, a director, a world builder, that AI cannot help me do the thing that I am best at. I think that thing only comes from process. But can it help me, like you said before, if I put my producer hat on, and I wear that role sometimes too on productions, does it help us enable a certain process to move faster?
Yes.
Sure. And then let's empower the person, the department head, the artist that's doing something with the tool that they need.
Yeah. But I mean, does that mean that another person isn't hired? Probably.
Never. Not in our production. Not in our productions. On other people's productions,
yes,
I'm sure.
But also, can you keep up then too? That's the question of like, if you're the shortcuts, if they're happening and people can outbid your company now, it's just a tricky world where I see how, it might be really hard to stand that ground if, you've got twice as many people working on your show as another one.
That's true.
So we'll see. I mean, I'm not making those decisions right now. I do wonder how theater might be booming too, because theater is so human interested, and like, I know there's been some plays, McNeil came out when that had an AI generated text, but I think in general, theater is interested in very much like, what are we up to as people? And so there's a part of me that's like, oh God, at least I have theater. Because
and poetry, if you study that next year.
Yeah.
I want to touch on Cleopatra.
Let's do it.
Just a little bit. We
touch.
haven't spoken very widely about it publicly yet, because obviously the production is in development. You are my writer on this piece, and a great creative and collaborator. I'm interested to know what terrifies you about this production and what excites you.
Oh, that's great. I think it's terrifying to present, be investigating someone's psyche who is so mythologized, so powerful. Yeah. And to give, it's such a beast of a role for anyone to play that role. And so to create material that is worthy of the performer is always the challenge, but especially when there's this huge mythology behind her. The text scares me, but that's you. Like, I'm like, how are we going to put this one together? But you do things that I could only dream of. So I celebrate that. And what am I excited about? I think the world, like actually the physical space that we're dreaming of, and you came to me with some initial staging thoughts, like of just like, here's what I see. And it's like such a North Star to me. And that's what's beautiful about the kind of work we do, is that your North Star can be a set piece. It can be the way the audience enters and takes off their shoes, these things that sort of create landmarks for you to create around. I find the things you brought, the original images, are so compelling.
Yes. We'll hide those from the public for now, but they'll get revealed over time, to be continued. Mm-hmm. On that sense, what else compels you about it? Why did you decide to embark on this journey with me?
Well, I love you.
That's kind.
I'm not kidding. Kira, you're like, do you want to do this? Without knowing it, I'm like, yes. But I think that, I don't know how to talk about it without talking about giving away too much, but little snapshots of people's lives, these little, the punctuation marks at the end of their sentences of their life. Mm-hmm. What is it in that breath, in those moments that are just the sort of intimate moments when things, in between the big things happening, that preparation and how that feels is so beautiful to me. And also this idea, in some ways it is very spiritual, like becoming a myth.
Yes.
It's, not unlike the conversation we're having in Sumo.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's kind of funny. I was thinking about parallels having delved into your production because I didn't know anything about Sumo.
Yeah.
So and I've kind of almost been waiting, because obviously I didn't get to make it to La Jolla, but I've been waiting for it to come to New York.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that kind, and I think, I don't know, that's a interest in that which is not seen. Mm-hmm. Is a huge part of all my work. And I think we resonate on that level too. As creators, I think we're putting something into being that didn't happen before. And so in some ways our interest in that which is unseen, I think, can be very high, because it comes from here and then goes out there and then you're like, oh my God, everyone's doing it. And so that kind of, the threshold of embodied to mythic or embodied to something else, or a different kind of embodiment, is fascinating to me.
I agree. I'm fascinated with that. I'm fascinated with her. If I were to speak to, what it is about Cleopatra that has drawn me, obviously I love strong female characters, but I think most audiences and people are familiar with her sensuality, her romances, her connection to Julius Caesar and to Mark Antony, but they're not as familiar with what she did as a ruler. Mm-hmm. The fact that she was a great intellect. She spoke 9 languages. She was one of the most intellectual people of that time period. Mm-hmm. She, created economic reforms. She averted famine. She was incredible and young. She was so young. Mm-hmm. And she was also a mother. She was a lot of different things. She wasn't just a sensual woman. Mm-hmm. She was also those things. And so there's so many layered levels of her, and I think almost like, she's such a prism, and I think we all are as humans. We have to find those sides and embrace them more. And but she just lived such an incredible life. So I'm very interested in exploring more of that. Mm-hmm. And of course the ephemera, which I think I'm always interested in that connection to liveness. Mm-hmm. So more on that later on our Cleopatra, on our Cleopatra story and experience. The last thing that I really want to do with you is something that I call the lightning round.
I'm ready.
Okay, good. Dawn or dusk?
Dusk.
Favorite season?
Spring.
Mine too.
Yeah, we're almost there. I'm like, come spring.
Shadow, force, light, or time?
Time.
Your favorite subject in school?
English.
If you could have retaken a subject over again in school, in VR?
Physics.
If you could invite one person from the past to put on a virtual reality headset, who would it be?
My mom.
She would have loved it. Mm. Would you like an alien question?
Yes.
If aliens were arriving tomorrow and you were the person chosen from Earth to deliver the message, what would you say?
I think Vonnegut said this at the end of his life. He said, I'm proud to say I was one of us. I think something like, I am one of us.
Do you have a favorite line from a poem?
Yes. So be it, heart, bid farewell without end. And that's from Hermann Hesse in The Glass Bead Game.
Beautiful. Thank you for being here with me
Kira,
in New York.
I love you.
I'm in physical reality.
We're doing it.
We're doing it. Yes. More creative discussions to come.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for entering the portal with me. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the next stage of storytelling, like and subscribe so that you can catch all of our episodes. If you're ready for more, jump through the portal into the next episode. If you've got a vision for your own immersive production, partner with Double I Studios and bring the future of storytelling to life today. May you stay curious, open, and embrace the future. I'll see you at the next act.